The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Price Industries' executive floor as Jonathan Price reviewed the quarterly reports with a critical eye. At 42, Jonathan had built his technology empire from nothing, and trust came as rarely to him as failure. "Mr. Price, your 10 o'clock is here," Rebecca Shaw announced, her gentle voice a contrast to the sterile office environment. Jonathan nodded without looking up. "And the Henderson contract?" "Signed and processed," Rebecca replied, placing a folder on his desk. "Also, I've arranged for those rare orchids to be delivered to your father's hospital room. The nurses mentioned they might brighten his spirits." This made Jonathan look up. Rebecca had been his executive assistant for only 3 months, yet she'd taken an interest in his father's recovery that seemed to exceed professional obligations. Harold Price had suffered a severe stroke 6 weeks ago, leaving him partially paralyzed and increasingly depressed. "You didn't need to do that," Jonathan said, his tone measured. Rebecca smiled. It was no trouble. "I have a standing order with the florist anyway." Later that evening, Jonathan visited his father at Mercy General. Found Harold actually laughing for the first time since his stroke. Beside him sat Rebecca, reading aloud from his father's favorite mystery novel. "Jonathan." Harold's face lit up.
"Ah, Rebecca here's been keeping me company."
"Did you know she volunteers at the hospital on weekends?" Jonathan's expression remained neutral, but internally, warning bells rang. Why would his assistant spend her free time with his father? In his experience, people only got close to the Price family for one reason: money. "That's thoughtful of her," he managed, watching Rebecca gather her things. "I should head out," she said. "Good night, Mr. Price, Harold." After she left, Harold smiled contentedly. "What an extraordinary young woman. She reminds me of your mother. Same kind heart." Jonathan's jaw tightened. He'd heard similar praise about women who'd tried to get close to him before. Gold diggers, all of them. His ex-fiancée Olivia had even befriended his business partners to gain insider trading information. "Dad, be careful," Jonathan warned. "People aren't always what they seem." Harold's smile faded. "Not everyone has an agenda, son." Drove home, he couldn't shake his suspicions. Rebecca was too perfect efficient, compassionate, beautiful. What did she really want? The thought that she might be manipulating his vulnerable father made his blood run cold. He wouldn't let anyone take advantage of his family again. Not ever. 2 weeks passed, and Jonathan found himself increasingly disturbed by Rebecca's involvement. With his father, every day brought new evidence of her attention. Homemade soup delivered to Harold's room. Old vinyl records from his favorite jazz era appearing on his nightstand. Most concerning, long hours spent at his bedside. Jonathan stood in the doorway of his father's hospital room, watching unseen as Rebecca helped Harold with his physical therapy exercises, her patience seemingly endless as she encouraged him through each painful movement. "Just one more, Harold. You're doing wonderfully," she said, her smile genuine. "Because you won't let me quit," Harold chuckled, his affected arm trembling with effort. Jonathan retreated before they noticed him, his mind racing. He instructed his head of security, Marcus, to run a thorough background check on Rebecca Shaw. The results came back spotless nursing degree she never used. Volunteer work at multiple organizations, modest apartment in the city, no suspicious. Financial activity. There must be something, Jonathan insisted, pacing his office. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, sometimes people are just ... Good." Jonathan dismissed him with a wave. "Expand the search. Everyone has secrets." That evening, Jonathan found Rebecca at his father's bedside again. This time, teaching him how to use a tablet to video chat with his old military buddies. "Rebecca," Jonathan said coldly, "may I speak with you in private?" In the hallway, he kept his voice low. "I notice you're spending considerable time here, well beyond your professional duties." Rebecca's expression remained calm. "Your father is a wonderful man who needs company during recovery. I don't mind. And you expect me to." "Believe there's no ulterior motive?" Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "No hope for a promotion? A raise? Perhaps access to Price family connections?" A flash of hurt crossed Rebecca's face. Not everyone measures kindness in dollars and cents, Mr. Price. In my experience, they do, he countered, especially when it comes to my family. Rebecca straightened her shoulders. Then your experience has been tragically limited. She walked away, leaving Jonathan feeling both vindicated and strangely hollow. The next day, Delnis's assistant Paula informed him that Rebecca had requested time off to take her grandmother to medical appointments. This an excuse to avoid scrutiny? He decided to follow her after work. What he discovered was Rebecca helping an elderly woman into a modest clinic. Nothing suspicious. Yet it didn't quell his doubts. That night, he reviewed security footage from his father's hospital room and froze when he saw Rebecca sitting alone beside Harold's sleeping form, quietly wiping tears from her eyes. What game is she playing? Whined to himself, rewinding. The footage. People didn't cry for strangers unless they wanted something. Jonathan had learned that lesson the hard way. As dawn broke, Jonathan made his decision. He would confront Rebecca directly and end whatever scheme she was orchestrating before his father got hurt. He ignored the small voice inside him that whispered, another possibility that, perhaps, just perhaps, Rebecca Shaw was exactly who she appeared to be. Rain lashed against the windows of Price Industries as Jonathan summoned Rebecca to his office. She entered with the same quiet confidence she always displayed, though her eyes held a wariness that hadn't been there before. Close the door, Jonathan instructed, his voice like ice. Rebecca complied, then stood facing him, her posture straight, but her hands clasped tightly together, the only indication of her nervousness. I'll be direct. Miss Shaw, Jonathan began, leaning forward at his desk. What exactly do you hope to gain from your relationship with my father? Rebecca blinked. I'm not sure I understand the question. Don't play innocent, Jonathan said. Rising from his chair, the extra hours, the gifts, the personal attention, it's excessive and inappropriate. Oh. I want to know your endgame. Flush crept up Rebecca's neck. There is no endgame, Mr. Price. Your father is a kind man going through a difficult time. My own grandfather died alone in a hospital while I was stuck overseas. No one should face recovery without support. Jonathan scoffed. A touching story. But I've heard better performances. You think I haven't noticed how you've positioned yourself as indispensable to him? How you've worked to gain his trust? It's called friendship, Rebecca replied, her voice quivering slightly. Something you might recognize if you weren't so determined to see the worst in everyone. I see people for what they are, Jonathan countered, circling his desk to stand before her. And I've seen too many try to use my family's vulnerability for personal gain. Rebecca's eyes widened with hurt. Is that what you think I'm doing? What else should I think when my executive assistant suddenly becomes my father's constant companion? When she brings him gifts she can't possibly afford on her salary? Those orchids were from my own garden, Rebecca said quietly. The books were from my personal collection. Not everything has a price tag, Mr. Price. Jonathan laughed bitterly. In my world, everything does. Then I feel sorry for you, she whispered. I don't need your pity, he snapped. What I need is honesty. Are you hoping for a promotion? A stake in the company? Or perhaps you're aiming higher, trying to integrate yourself into the Price family through my father's affection.
The color.
Drained from Rebecca's face, she reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope, placing it on his desk with trembling fingers. My resignation, effective immediately, she said, her voice barely audible. I would have given 2 weeks' notice. But I don't think either of us wants to prolong this association. Something twisted in Jonathan's chest triumph mingled with an unexpected pang of regret. So you're running rather than admitting the truth? Rebecca looked him directly in the eyes, tears gathering but not falling. The truth is that I respected you, Mr. Price. I admired your brilliance and your dedication. And yes, I came to care for your father as I would my own family. But clearly, those are unforgivable offenses in your world. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Your father asked me to bring him the chess set from your childhood home. The key is in your bottom desk drawer. I hope you'll find time to play with him. He misses you more than you know. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Jonathan alone with an unexpected emptiness washing over him. He told himself it was relief, But as the rain continued to beat against the windows, another emotion crept in: doubt. 3 weeks passed without Rebecca's presence, and Jonathan noticed the difference everywhere: in the slightly less organized files, in the efficiency of meetings, but most of all, in his father's dimmed spirits. Harold had stopped asking about her after the first week, his silence on the matter more accusatory than any words could be. Jonathan sat beside his father's hospital bed, attempting to fill the void Rebecca had left with his own awkward company. Harold stared out the window, barely touching the gourmet meal Jonathan had brought. "The doctors say you might be able to go home next week," Jonathan offered. Harold nodded absently. Rebecca would have been pleased to hear that. Jonathan tensed. "Dad, about Rebecca. You drove her away, didn't you?" Harold turned to face his son, his eyes sharp despite his weakened state. "What did you say to her?" "I protected you," Jonathan defended. "People like her." "People like her," Harold interrupted, his voice stronger than it had been in months. "You mean kind, genuine people, who see beyond wealth and status?" "I mean people who ingratiate themselves with vulnerable others for personal gain," Jonathan corrected. Harold's laugh was bitter. "Is that what you think she was doing? That poor girl refused every gift I tried to give her. When I offered to pay for her grandmother's medical treatments, she wouldn't hear of it." Jonathan froze. "What medical treatments?" "Her grandmother has Parkinson's," Harold explained. "Rebecca's been caring for her since her grandfather passed. She works 3 jobs to cover the expenses. Did you even know that?" A cold feeling settled in Jonathan's stomach. 3 jobs? Price Industries, weekend shifts at the hospital gift shop, and night classes teaching ESL to immigrants. Harold shook his head. She slept maybe 4 hours a night. And still, she found time to keep an old man company. Jonathan sank deeper into his chair as Harold continued. "When I asked why she wouldn't let me help financially, do you know what? She said love and loyalty can't be bought, Harold. They're given freely or not at all." The words hit Jonathan like a physical blow. He remembered his security team's report, the modest apartment, the nursing degree, the volunteer work. All the pieces had been there, but he'd arranged them into the wrong picture. "I made a mistake," Jonathan admitted, the words unfamiliar on his tongue. "Yes, you did," Harold agreed. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" That night, Jonathan sat in his penthouse, surrounded by evidence of his wealth, the rare art. The designer furniture, the views of the city that had cost millions to secure. None of it filled the emptiness that had been growing inside him since Rebecca left. He opened his laptop and searched for information about Parkinson's treatments, about ESL programs in the city, about the small apartment building where Rebecca lived. With each discovery, his regret deepened. At dawn, Jonathan found himself outside his father's hospital room, overhearing a conversation between Harold and his night nurse. "She still calls me every evening," Harold was saying. "Never mentions. Jonathan just asks how I'm doing. That's the kind of person she is. Some people see with their hearts, not their wallets." The nurse replied. Jonathan leaned against the wall, a realization washing over him, in trying to protect himself from being used. He had become the very thing he despised, someone who valued people only for what they could provide or cost him. For the first time in years, Jonathan Price knew exactly what he had to do, and had nothing to do with business strategies or protecting assets. It was time to find Rebecca Shaw. The community center stood in stark contrast to the gleaming skyscrapers of Jonathan's world, a modest brick building with children's artwork taped to the windows. Inside, he felt immediately out of place, in his tailored suit among the worn furniture and cheerful chaos. "Can I help you?" asked an elderly volunteer at the front desk. "I'm looking for Rebecca Shaw," Jonathan replied, his usual confidence wavering. The woman eyed him suspiciously. "She's teaching in room 7, but they're in the middle of a class." Jonathan nodded his thanks and found his way down the hallway. Stopping outside a classroom, where Rebecca's voice carried through the partially open door, she was helping a group of adults practice English conversation, her patient guidance evident in every word. He waited until the class ended, watching as students thanked her warmly before departing. When the last student left, Jonathan stepped into the doorway. Rebecca looked up, her smile fading when she saw him. "Mr. Price." "Jonathan," he corrected softly. "May I come in?" She nodded stiffly, gathering papers as he entered. "I spoke with my father," he began. "Harold is a wonderful man," she replied neutrally. "I hope he's continuing to improve." Jonathan took a deep breath. "Rebecca, I owe you an apology." "Several, actually." She paused her movements but didn't look at him. "I misjudged you," he continued. "I saw your kindness and assumed it had an ulterior motive because that's been my experience. I didn't consider that you might simply be ... good." Rebecca finally met his gaze. "Not everyone measures human connection in terms of profit and loss." "I'm beginning to understand that," Jonathan admitted. "Father told me about your grandmother." "About the 3 jobs? Why didn't you say anything?" "Would it have mattered?" she asked. "You'd already decided who I was." The truth of her words stung. "I was wrong," he said simply. "And I'm sorry." Rebecca regarded him carefully. "Apology accepted. Is that all?" Jonathan shifted uncomfortably. In business negotiations, he always held the power. But here, he was completely vulnerable. "No," he said quietly, "that's not all. I miss you. My father misses you. The company doesn't run as well without you." "I'm sure you'll find an excellent replacement," Rebecca replied, but her voice had softened slightly. "I don't want a replacement," Jonathan said, moving closer. "I want you to come back, but not just as my assistant. I need to know the person my father sees, the person who gives so generously without expecting anything in return." Rebecca studied him, searching for sincerity. "People don't change overnight, Jonathan." "No," he agreed. "But they can recognize when they need to change." "I've spent my life building walls to protect myself from disappointment and betrayal. In the process, I've shut out everything that matters." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "This isn't a bribe or a payment," he clarified quickly. "It's an invitation. My father is being released next week. He's having a small gathering at home to thank the hospital staff who helped him. He asked me to give you this." Rebecca accepted the envelope cautiously. "I'll understand if you don't come," Jonathan continued, "but I hope you will. Not for me, but for him." As he turned to leave, Rebecca called after him. "Jonathan, the chess set, did you find it?" He paused at the door. "Yes, we've been playing every evening. Still beats me mercilessly." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Good." 1 week later, Jonathan paced nervously in his father's garden, where the small reception was being held. Harold watched him with knowing eyes from his wheelchair. "She might not come," Jonathan said, "for the 10th time. She'll come." Harold replied confidently. "Not for you, for the nurses and doctors she worked alongside." Rebecca doesn't abandon people. As if summoned by his words, she appeared at the garden entrance, dressed simply but elegantly. She greeted Harold first with a warm embrace, then made her way around the gathering. Connecting with everyone with genuine interest, Jonathan kept his distance, watching her light up the space around her. When she finally approached him, he felt an unfamiliar flutter in his chest. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Harold asked me to bring dessert," she replied, gesturing to the homemade cake she'd contributed. "It was my grandmother's recipe." "How is your grandmother?" Jonathan asked genuinely. Surprise flickered across Rebecca's face at his interest. "She's having a good week. The new medication seems to be helping." "I'm glad to hear that," he said. Sincerely, an awkward silence fell between them until Jonathan gathered his courage. "Rebecca, I know I have no right to ask, but would you consider having dinner with me? Not as my employee or my father's friend, but just with me?" Rebecca tilted her head thoughtfully. "Why?" "Because I want to know you," he answered honestly. "The real you. Not the person I incorrectly assumed you to be. And maybe, if I'm very fortunate, you might want to know the real me too." Rebecca's expression remained serious, but her eyes softened. Just dinner, he confirmed, though I hope it might be the first of many conversations." "What felt like an eternity?" She nodded. "I can't promise anything beyond one dinner, Jonathan." "I understand," he said, relief washing over him. "That's more than I deserve." As the evening progressed, Jonathan noticed Rebecca laughing with his father, their affection for each other evident. Harold caught his son's eye and gave him a subtle nod of approval. Jonathan realized then that his journey was just beginning. Dismantling the walls he'd built over a lifetime would take time and courage. But watching Rebecca's genuine smile, her kindness to everyone regardless of their status, he knew that whatever happened between them, she had already given him an invaluable gift, the chance to see that true connection couldn't be bought or sold. It could only be earned through trust, vulnerability, and the willingness to see people not for what they might take from you, but for who they truly are.